Good evening, everybody. Welcome out to tonight's members training for all the members of Tax Sale Support. We're going to do things a little bit differently than how we normally do them tonight. Here, we're still going to do a training, but what we're actually going to do is normally we do a podcast. At least once a month, twice a month, I think is what our plans are here for it. But we basically haven't had time to record that podcast yet, and it goes through a lot of, I think, helpful information and fun information. And so we decided it would be good content to go over in a webinar instead.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like Shade said, we've got some cool things to go over tonight. We're going to go look at some auctions. We're going to talk about different risks that are involved in buying property and buying land. So we've got some exciting things to cover this evening. So it'll be a little bit different, but I think it might be kind of fun.
Yeah, I agree. So uh, yeah, welcome out. This is going to be episode 6 of the Tax Sale Titans podcast here, and so with that, let's get into. We're going to be covering a number of different topics and jumping into different segments of the training here. Just a quick shout out and thank you to our members, all of you that are here. And also, we even have people, many of you probably found us originally on Facebook. At least that's how a lot of people have found us in the past, was through Facebook and have followed us through videos. But really, I think to all of our members, I think it means a lot to us, to have you following us or to have you watching our videos or spending your time doing it. And so we just want to thank you for your time and for your dedication to us.
Yeah, absolutely. From our coaching members to our program members, and like Shade said, some of you guys have found us through Facebook or YouTube. And so if you you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, go ahead and check it out. We'll be putting some different information out there as well on the YouTube.
Yeah, and also just a quick note here for everybody. If you haven't joined, on the YouTube channels, it's a good place. Make sure you're joined on there so that as we release new videos on there, you'll see them as they come up, and also the weekly webinars that we'll always have posted just on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be the weekly webinars will be password protected there on the website. As far as any news and announcements, really the biggest news is our 3 days. As members of the program, you'll automatically get a $200 discount if you're interested in attending. And so we're going to be holding in the DC Baltimore area this weekend. Then we'll be in Florida, in Miami, on February 2 through the 4th. Then we're going to be in Orlando in February 9th through the 11th. So we're going to be in Florida 2 weeks in a row. If you're in that area, definitely hit us up. And then we'll be going to California on February 16th through the 18th.
Yeah, really, we would love to see you out at one of these 3-day events. 3 days is a lot of time for us to cover a lot of material, and so we can get into go into greater depth with tax sales. We can also go into greater depth with how it relates to other real estate and other ways that you can make money. I mean, ultimately, tax sales are a finding method for real estate. We're really more interested in finding good deals, and so yeah, we'd love to have you come out and spend that time, and we want to take care of you when you come out. So it includes lunches and things like that.
Yeah, we really do think it's one of the best trainings available out there. Shay talked about how we focus on other aspects as well, and that's kind of the benefit of the training is we have 3 days to really teach you about tax sale investing, but then also talk about some of the other strategies involved in real estate. So as far as the training tip of the week and what we want to talk about this week is we want to talk about the top 3 tax deed risks. As you're investing in the tax deeds, these are the 3 things that we're usually going to need to watch out for, and they're going to be the most important in buying real estate through a tax deed foreclosure auction.
Yeah, I think when you are so I guess the risks with tax sale investing vary a little bit depending on what it is that you're buying. For instance, if you're buying liens, we're going to be looking at some liens, tonight that are really very safe investments, incredibly secure because, and you'll see why exactly they have so much security to them. But it's different when you're buying deeds because, you're buying the property outright, and that includes, buying anything that comes along with it. And so if there are liens, if there's things attached to the property, if there are if there's encumbrances that can cost you money, those are also attached, and that's a risk, and it's actually one that's fairly common, for tax sale properties. So it's one we need to be able to look into. But these are the top three risks that we need to look out for when we are buying tax deeds.
Yeah, absolutely. And in those risks, the number one being usability. You've always heard us talk about, or anyone that's been part of our trainings, we talk about having both use and value. And that's going to be definitely important. We need to make sure that the property is usable. Now, in something like a home, that's pretty basic. If it's something like a home, there's some use to it, or there was some use to it. When we're talking about land investing, which there's a lot of land in tax sales, we really need to check into some of those things about the land before making a decision.
In fact, I think this is probably one of the bigger risks, that investors face, because really the risk that lies here is of picking up property that's basically junk. This is kind of the same thing as junk land, but this is looking into it a little bit more specifically and why it's junk land. It is about understanding what makes it junk land, and that really comes down to usability. Um, Usability is something that it's funny. Originally, if we were looking at an overhead map, and if the lots all looked like they were the same size, and we just figured, oh, everything's usable. But that's not how it works. We figured that out very quickly, that the usability is actually determined, by very specific parameters that we can find and define. But we don't want to buy until we've defined what those parameters are, and we make sure that our property, meets those parameters. Because if we buy a property that falls outside of that, as good as it might look, it's not going to be usable. It's not going to be buildable, and therefore the value is probably not going to be very high on it either.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's important that we research for the minimum lot size for any commercial residential property that we're buying. Just like Shade said, you can't just look at an overhead map and say, "Oh, that lot looks like it's the same size as the other lots." It's buildable. It may have been buildable at one time, but what's happened over the last 20 years is some of these towns and cities have changed their zoning codes. So maybe a quarter acre lot used to be buildable, but now it's a third acre lot. So in looking in that quarter acre lot, you may think that, hey, this is a great lot, it's buildable, but if you actually get into the code, you can't build on it. And so if you can't build on it, we're really limiting the value of that property. Who can we sell it to? Maybe the next door neighbor. And if they're not interested in it, who can we sell it to from them? Really nobody. And so in that kind of situation, we bought a property that has no usability, which really means that it has no value, regardless if the county has placed value on it or not. It has no value because we can't sell it to anyone.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to with these properties is, our ability to sell them, is going to be very hindered, because no, we can't just sell them to anybody. The only people that are really going to buy a property like that might be an adjacent property owner, somebody that can extend their property a little bit. But, even then, that's a very small pool of potential buyers. And so, yeah, ultimately, usability is going to be determined by property zoning and the zoning ordinances, that have been passed, or the codes, whichever the terminology is here they use. But basically, the ordinances are just laws, and they're laws that the local town or city, have passed. And like Steve was saying, they change over time. And in fact, it's interesting. You can, if you follow counties and their public announcements and their public notices section, you'll see where they address things that come up, and certainly changing things like the minimum requirements there for lots is something that they do, and sometimes they do it with this idea that somehow that they're going to be able to increase the value, or they're trying to bring up the value of real estate, and so they figure if they require bigger lots, that somehow they won't. I don't know. I guess that's what their thinking is when they do that. But it's something that we've seen over and over again, in many, many areas, because you might have neighborhoods that were developed originally, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, And so since then, there's been quite a bit of time for them to make up changes like that if they want.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely something we're going to be researching, as we're buying any type of property. Now, when we're talking about land and specifically land risk, there's a couple of different types. In fact, there's really many types. One of them that we're going to find is landlocked properties. We'll usually avoid any type of landlocked property because we don't have any legal access to the property. Again, who are we going to sell it to? Even if the property is surrounded by 4 different owners, you're going to have one of those owners that will either want to be able to buy the property or allow you an easement to access through their property to your property, which is going to be pretty tough to find somebody who's just willing to be able to do that. And so when it comes to landlocked properties, side lots, anything like that, we're going to completely avoid those type of properties.
Yeah, and in fact, I know that these risks apply to to tax deeds, but actually, as I'm thinking about it, they really kind of apply to liens too, if you're looking, because as we were looking at some of the liens, I saw a lien that was that's in the current sale, that is for a thin plot of land, like it's a strip, that's only maybe 5 or 10 feet wide and maybe 50 to 100 feet long. Totally useless in terms of from us as investors. And so at the same time, it is a risk with liens, and at least with liens, we do at least do as much as pulling up the records and seeing what the property is. And so it is easy to avoid a risk like that, but definitely gets identified. As soon as you pull up the map, you realize that it's one of these these types of properties you want to avoid.
Yeah, well, even in risk, we've always talked about, the property having both use and value. And so we may not go necessarily and look into the minimum building lot if we're looking at a lot and has value. But in any of these type of properties that are going to be what we consider to be junk land, you're going to completely avoid buying them regardless if it's a lien or a tax deed, because if we did bought it as a lien, we wouldn't want to acquire that property anyway. In fact, sometimes, well, properties that are like swampland, low value land. In fact, sometimes we'll see properties that are, nothing but an easement, for example, like a road or even a utility easement, where, even though the land may have some value, the utility of the easement automatically makes the property unusable. In fact, it reminds me of a story, something that happened years ago where we had been approached by a couple of investors that ended up buying a property in Texas that had utility towers and cell towers on it. And they thought by buying the property, they could automatically, charge all of these cell providers and utility providers essentially rent because it's on their land, not realizing that easement allowed them to do that for free. And that's the reason the property was sold in the tax sale to begin with.
Yeah, yeah, you're not gonna fool, you're not gonna outwit, these big corporations that are worth all this kind of money that easily, with something like that. There's a reason why they let the property go in the first place, or why they didn't pay the property taxes, and it's probably because it didn't matter if they did or didn't. In either case, their easement, grants them access to, to the property for that purpose. And so, even if the property is owned by whoever, it doesn't really matter because they have the legal right to access it. So therefore, owning it doesn't really matter. But yeah, anytime you see something, I mean, if you see anything that looks like it is something that is operated by the government or that's been placed there by the government, it's an indication of an easement, most likely, and will certainly hamper your ability to do anything else with the property. So those are things we always look for, just like we always look for things like water features or things that might, be indications that the property has other problems. You have to be aware of all types because a lot of times those problems are not, you can't always tell right off the bat until you dig into them a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The second one that we're going to watch for, the second biggest risk, is going to be government liens. Generally speaking, when we're talking about the judicial foreclosure process, which is the tax foreclosure process, it's going to go through what's called a judicial foreclosure. Now, that judicial foreclosure, it removes any existing financial debts and obligations, things like mortgages, judgments. But what can stick to those properties is things like government liens. There's a number of different government liens that aren't going to be extinguished through that judicial foreclosure process, which means when you buy that tax deed property, those liens are still going to attach to it even after you purchased it.
Yeah, this is a problem. Well, I guess it's a risk that we can avoid by doing some research, doing some title research. Actually, is what we're going to do, or how we're going to find it. But the types of liens that we run into, there's a variety that you can see. Although by far the most common type that we run into are ones that have been issued by the local government there, which is usually going to be, city, village, town, something along those level. Uh, and the most common types of liens are usually going to be either a nuisance lien, or like a cleanup lien, or sometimes we see things like assessment liens and things like that that are issued as well. Um, but by far, those are going to be the liens that you're going to come across most commonly, and especially, with tax sale properties. These are properties that I think also have maybe a higher chance of having these types of liens than just regular properties. And so we need to be extra diligent when we're looking, at properties for liens. See, because also sometimes we come across state liens as well. We see state liens. We research them all the same way. So we see IRS liens, we see state liens, but yeah, by far most common is going to be city liens. Medical liens are actually, those are an issue as well. In fact, they're kind of a big issue in certain places. Like Oklahoma, they're kind of an issue.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about government lien types, like Shade said, I would say 80%, 90% of the liens are going to be some type of city lien, whether that be a grass cut lien, they had to send somebody out there to mow the grass down. In fact, that's something that we're looking at as we're researching the property, looking at the overhead maps. If we see a building lot that has grass and has been mowed recently, that's automatically a kind of a red flag to us, is who's mowing that grass. Chances are it's this sending somebody out there from the city to be able to do that, which means that there's going to be cost involved. And if the cost is involved, what the city will do is go ahead and place a lien against it. So we can occasionally see state liens. We can see medical liens in certain states. We can occasionally see an IRS lien. With state, city, and medical liens, those are liens that essentially attach to the property and that will need to be paid. With the IRS lien, it's really just more a waiting period. You'll fill out a form. If there's an IRS lien, the IRS has 120 days to either take ownership of the property by paying off what you paid for the property, or taking ownership of the property. And from our experience, most of the time they'll go ahead and take ownership of it. They'll go ahead and release the lien, and versus trying to take ownership of it.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, that's nearly, I think, what happens most of the time. In fact, we've got a good question here, and it is, if you search the official records for a property owner and find deeds and liens and such, could there be liens that aren't located in the records? And if so, where could they be found? Uh, so I guess it depends on what types of things, that we're looking for here. But if we're talking about a property that's owned by, let's say, a single individual, um, the way that we know that there aren't additional liens that are out there, is because we're going to look up and find anything that has come up, or anything that's been issued against the property since the time that this owner has owned it. And we're going to go back to the time that it had a warranty deed last, right? So we're going to go back. So let's say that this owner, when they purchased it, it was with a warranty deed, which is not uncommon. Usually it is with the warranty deed, when it's done with properties and financing. And so we know at the time of the warranty deed that property is free and clear of any kinds of liens or encumbrances. That's the reason why we look back to the time where it had a warranty deed. Um, so from that time forward is really what we're concerned about. And if there is a single property owner there that we're looking at, then if there are liens, they would have to be issued against that individual. At least I don't know that it's possible for liens to exist against a property and have them not be issued against the property owner first. I think it almost has to be. And so I don't know that it is possible to have other kinds of liens out there, unless you've got additional property owners that are there and that you haven't searched up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as our options, what are our options in finding out about these liens? Well, there's really two different options. There's a professional title search and what we call an investor title search. When me and Shade first got started back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of information available. In fact, there was just two books that had been printed that we could find, and many of them were, 5, 10, 15 years old. But at that time, really the recommendation in buying tax deed property was to have a professional title search done. Now, when we first got started, we didn't have, we had limited capital to begin with. And even with my discount of being a real estate agent, it still may cost, if we had 20 or 30 properties we were interested in researching, to have a title report done on each one of those, maybe a few grand. And so, that wasn't a real good option for us there in the beginning. But as the internet started changing things, that opened up our options in researching the titles without just having a professional title search done.
Yeah, it was a total game changer. Because previously, I mean, you could do this kind of research, but you had to be inside a county records building, in order to do it. That's where you could find things like liens. And so really all that's happened today is we just have, now we have internet access to those same records so we can perform the same research. But this is, I mean, you're going to find all the liens that exist against a property, using these methods. In fact, your options, you could still have like a lien report done on a property, which in some cases that might still be the best way to go, especially if you can't access the records you need to. So let's say that you're dealing with the county that doesn't have, their official records online. If that's the case, then you could pay for a lien report to be done. But from our experience, though, even with lien reports, we're finding the exact same things that a lien report is going to find, because essentially we're going through the same process that the lien report is going through to find liens. They're going through the same way. They're not really finding the liens any other way than what we are, which is essentially looking through the records associated with the property owner's name. And so, another question here was about child support, which that's actually another one that is kind of like the medical liens, where it can be an issue in some states. At least, uh, those liens can stick, and they're liens that are issued by a government entity, so they don't just drop off, after the foreclosure. That is kind of one of the risks of. Now, I also don't think though that you're going to be liable for somebody else's child support. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to be a headache to deal with a little bit. We've typically tried to avoid those, but yeah, in some areas though, we've been to sales before where, they handed out, big rings of paper that were just full of medical liens, or that were full of different types of liens like that, that were against some of the properties. And so it is something that can come up, and that we try to look for as well. But even a medical lien should be issued the same way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So really, with the internet bringing all of those records online, that really opened up the ability for us to do these investor title searches. We first started seeing it in the early 2000s, and it's just become more and more available, where more and more counties are making these records available online. And part of it is because it's easier for them as well. The counties, have staff there, and back in the day, you needed to go down and research the property, and then the staff would need to go through and look up and find that information and then print it off. And so it was this whole ordeal. And there's still some counties that we'll go to with some of our buying tours where we take some of our students and take them to an actual auction, where in certain areas we'll still go into the county courthouse to do some of that research. But what has changed is the county's making those records available online. So now we can just go ahead and use that owner's name and search that owner's name in the recorder's records or the clerk's records, and be able to pull up any government liens that attach to that owner's name.
In fact, and one other quick question is, how long do liens last? They say they're looking to buy a 20-acre lot that was owned by a dissolved corporation 20 years ago. The answer to that actually depends completely upon the state. And what their statute of limitations are, because it varies, but from state to state. In some places, it might only be 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. In other places, it might be. In Texas, I've seen them with liens that are over 20 years old. I mean, I've seen them still trying to collect taxes from that are over 20 years old. And so it depends on the state laws, that the property resides within.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a number of states where those liens are never going to be extinguished, unless you're able to work out a deal with those individual counties or cities. So it's important to look that up, and take into account. That's the reason when we're researching a property, we're always going to find out what liens are against that property and then try to negotiate that amount down with the individual cities. Now, the third thing that we're going to look at, especially having to do with structures, homes, is the condition. When we're talking about land, there can be some condition issues to a degree, but it is kind of what it is dirt. But when we're talking about, something like a structure, a home, a commercial property, the condition can make a property worthless regardless of how much you bought it for. So there may be homes that you can buy for $100 or $1,000 or $2,000 in areas of the country, through a land bank or an over the counter. But how much is it going to cost to rehab that property? Isn't financially worth it. If the property's only worth 60 grand and it's going to cost 80 grand in rehabbing, you're not going to make any money. You're going to lose money.
Yeah, that's the other side of it, is that it oftentimes it's directly associated with the value of the property as well. So it's a combination of the condition of the structure and the value, that it holds. And the lower the value of it, something like, for instance, the riskiest properties that we find are the properties that have a limited value. So let's say that they're valued at 50,000 or 60,000. Because those properties really can't afford to have too much put into them in terms of rehab. You know, um, Before, you're obviously in a position there where you're not going to make money, where it becomes a money pit, and that's the real risk that we face with condition. In fact, I don't know how many other ways we should tell people, that absolutely in no case don't ever buy properties, improve properties, without getting some kind of a current image of what the condition of the property is like, because otherwise you're just setting yourself up, to most likely be disappointed or run into major problems if you just buy sight unseen, which we've seen people do it and lose tens of thousands, uh, so much money. In fact, every time you go to a large or big auction, you're going to see people make this same mistake over and over again. And usually it's new people, but they go ahead and buy some kind of improved property, jump on it, or bid on it, without actually knowing what the condition is, and that's the biggest factor for us on these properties. I mean, there are properties that that you couldn't pay me to take.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see this on a monthly basis as we go out and attend different auctions. As we're going through and doing our evaluation, we'll put together a driving route of the properties that we want to go past and take photos. And, on the online evaluation, the property may look pretty good, and in fact, just even looking at this example, this is one of the examples of a property that we were looking at as a couple of years ago. But that property right there, if we're looking at it from the Google Street View, it looks like we can see a car there. You can see the light on. The grass is green. It looks like it's being used and lived in. Within a couple of years, a year or two, after this photo was taken, we went and did an actual on-site evaluation. And you can see that this property has some serious damage. First of all, we can tell it's abandoned. Some of the windows have been bolted up, but if we actually boarded up, but if we actually look in the front window, we can see that the window is wide open. So this is a property that a couple of years ago may have been a livable property, but now, based on the condition and also based on the value, this property doesn't make any sense. Now, if this property was located, let's say in Phoenix, Arizona, which we're going to be looking at in Arizona Liens here in a little bit, or in an area where this property, instead of being worth 60 to 70 grand, is maybe worth 180 grand or 200 grand, well, then maybe fixing up a beat up property could make sense because the real estate value of the area is so high that it makes sense to buy it. But in a property like this, where the value is so low within the area, maybe it's worth 60 to 80 grand, we could easily put in, 60 grand worth of repairs, and it may not even be livable at that point.
Yeah, yeah, that's the real problem, is that the numbers quickly, don't work if the value of the property is low and the conditions, if the repairs needed are many, and it's pretty easy to run out of money or to end up in a situation like that where you're not going to be profitable. And so, yeah, there are tons of ways to get current images. In fact, it's never been easier to find people to do this kind of work than it is today. You know, you just have to get some kind of a current image. I mean, Steve talked about us driving properties. We like to drive the properties before we bid on them for that exact reason. Even land, actually, driving land has actually turned out to be more beneficial than we would realize as well. Because in some cases, we'll go and drive the land, and it teaches you quite a bit about the neighborhood, and you learn things about the property by being there. And that you may not if you can't be there. But if you can't, these are all different individuals that you could hire or send out potentially to get things like photographs done.
Yeah, exactly. I talked a little earlier about creating a route. That's the same thing we do if we're doing it ourselves. So if we're going out there and driving the properties before the auction with some of our students, or if we're hiring somebody, whether that be a handyman or a photographer, to go out there and take photos with us. And so as we create that route, let's say we have 10 homes that we are interested in, we can put those into Google Maps or any of those map features and figure out exactly how long it's going to take for an individual to drive this route, and then put in time to take photos, maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes at each property to take some photos of that property, and we can get an idea of how long it's going to take. So if we're hiring a photographer or a handyman, or if we're just putting an ad in the classifieds, we've got an idea of how much it's going to cost based on how much time's going to be involved. So if maybe it's going to take 2 hours, maybe we're willing to pay them $100 or $125 or whatever it is to be able to go past and drive these routes based on the time that it takes them to do it.
You know, um, we have another question from Lisa. This is just a really good question that I wanted to address here. It says, she's saying, please recommend brokers that buy tax deed lots. Retailers only want to buy marketable title, not with cloud. This is a good question. I think that probably one of the things is how we approach it's a little bit different. So when it comes to tax deed lots that we are selling, we usually take either a wholesale approach, where we're going to wholesale the properties using a quitclaim deed, in which case, we're selling it through a number of different methods and sources here. We're not really selling it to retailers, per se, because again, we're able to offer it at a discounted rate, but it is still, we're going to sell it with a clouded title, but using that quitclaim deed. And so if the value of the property though is good enough, if it's over, let's say, over $20,000 in value, then it's probably going to make sense to do something to clear up or to make that to get marketable title, as you say, to get title insurance essentially for it. And that's where it's probably going to make sense, because if it's a $50,000 plus, property, you obviously wouldn't want to discount that dramatically, and there's no need to either. You can just go through the process to get, to make the deed marketable.
Yeah, and there's always options like tax title services and things like that that will provide title insurance. So if somebody does have an issue, at least they could buy it with title insurance by using Clear to Sell or tax title services. So as far as the final thoughts, buying land that's not usable severely limits who we can sell the property to. It's important that we go through and research government liens using the name of the owner. And something we don't have time to talk about, in this training, but as our members, we have trainings about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 due diligence and researching the title, and how we need to go through and research the deed as well. Because if the deed is not as a non-warranted deed, let's say the last deed or the last time it was sold was using a quitclaim deed, well, then we're going to have to research more than one owner. We're going to have to research that first owner and the second owner. So there's a lot of research that's going to go involved with buying tax deed properties. But as long as we've gone through and we've checked the things like usability, we've checked the zoning, we've checked for government liens, and if there is government liens, we know how much they are. We've negotiated or spoken with the city if we do acquire the property about paying off those liens afterwards. And when it comes to structured properties, we're doing an online evaluation. We're usually going to be safe from making any major mistakes.
Yeah, it's going to save us from most of your mistakes. Now we're not at the end of the webinar here. We're going to jump over and look at some auctions now live, which in doing so, we like the chance to be able to look at live auctions, so we can look at actual properties that are coming up and go through and look at some of the details about the properties, see what we can tell about the property. Whether it's been offered before, what we think the chances of it going to foreclosure are. And other things like that, so we can help you guys, understand and see how we look at different tax sale lists.
Yeah, now today we're going to be talking about Arizona, but before we do that, let's get into the rules a little bit, and then we'll go look at some of the live properties for sale. So this is just coming directly off of the county website or the county auction website. There's a couple of things that we want to point out. First of all, the tax certificate is going to consist of the sum of the delinquent taxes, which could include previous year taxes and interest, penalty fees, and essentially a taxpayer information fund as well. So all of those fees are going to be built into the opening bid of price. Now, the tax lien certificates, and we've talked about this before, they have a high priority, which means that they really are kind of the first position liens, which means that they need to get paid off before any other debts they're paid. And that's the reason tax liens are such a safe investment, is really because there's two options: either the property owner pays you back your money and your interest, or there's the foreclosure that can happen.
Yeah. Now they, in Arizona by law, in state law, it basically tells them that that their tax sale certificate auction has to take place in February. And so that's, they're kind of locked into that month. But it's worth it to sometimes to read through some of the state laws, especially if it's an area you're investing in. It can really help you understand why they do some of the things they do and part of how it works. But I like how they explain some of the things here, because sometimes people get confused with liens. And they say right here up front, the tax certificate itself conveys no property rights. It's simply a lien carrying an interest rate. However, if the certificate is not redeemed within 3 years of the date of the original sale, the certificate holder does have the right to foreclose on the property and take possession after taking all the proper steps in the judicial foreclosure process. And so, um, you know, basically, we can also see down there is it tells us how interest is paid out. In terms of the interest on certificates range from 0 to 16%. And basically it goes to the bidder willing to take the lower percentage. So that kind of tells us how they're going to conduct the auction, but also does a good job of explaining the process. We know there's a 3-year redemption period, on this, and that after 3 years, though, we do have the right to foreclose on the property if it hasn't been paid off, or at least we can initiate the foreclosure process, and then the owner can either pay it off or lose the property.
Yeah, now one thing to remember is when we're buying tax lien certificates, simple interest occurs on a monthly basis. For example, if the certificate carries, as it says here, a 12% interest rate, then the interest would recur at 1% per month until the certificate is redeemed. So if you go ahead and buy a tax lien certificate, and let's say it bids down to 12%, and the property owner redeems 2 months later, you're not going to get 12%. You're going to get 1% per month. Now, in some states like Florida, there's a prepayment penalty where if they foreclose, or if they redeem early, then you get a guaranteed 5%. But if they were to go ahead and pay you after 6 months, then you would make a 6% return, because essentially you're making that interest each month as it goes along.
Now, there are some additional rules and things about tax liens that are interesting or good to know. Essentially, though, when the property owner pays off their delinquent bill, that's when you're going to get paid off. That's basically when redemption occurs, the following day. So after the county gets paid, they're going to send a check. A redemption check is sent to the certificate holder, which is going to include your initial investment plus the interest that you've earned, up to that point. Um, they also let us know here that taxes are at least 2 years delinquent when they become available for tax lien certificate purchase. And parcels can be foreclosed on through a quiet title court action 3 years after the date of the sale. That also goes back to our redemption period. But it basically tells us that we can foreclose on the properties and pursue a quiet title action 3 years after the auction.
Yeah, one last point before we jump over that's important to remember is if your certificate remains active for 10 years without redemption or foreclosure action, then the lien will expire, which means that as we're looking in tax lien certificates, and there can be tax liens we probably won't, I don't know if we'll see any as we're going through today, where those tax liens may have many additional years worth of tax liens on it. It's what we call a toxic tax lien or an underwater tax lien, where we may be looking at a tax lien certificate from 2024 from this year, but there could be up to 10 other years worth of tax liens on that property, and those tax liens could be earning 16% interest per year. So you could have tax liens that are 10 years old earning 16% interest, and one that's 9 years old and one that's 8 years old, and all of those earning interest rates, where maybe you're looking at a tax lien and maybe it's only a couple $100 on some, let's say, $10,000, $20,000 lot. Well, you actually get into the full taxes to foreclose on that property. All of those tax liens would need to be paid. So you would be forced to pay off, each one of those, which could be as much as the property value. So when we see tax liens that have $8,000 worth of delinquent taxes on a property that's only worth $8,000, that's because of all of those years worth of delinquent taxes and the interest that has been earned over that time frame.
Yeah, in fact, let's go and take a look at some liens here, and we can see probably exactly what Steve is talking about here. So this is for Maricopa County. We can see here that they have a total of, uh, 18,715, records here. Although we can see some of them are unavailable and some of them, are still available. What's really interesting about this whole list, at least as I was going through it, was it was hard to find, it was hard to find junk, or even it was hard to even kind of find land. Show you what I mean. So if I'm looking at any of the liens that were for like 1,000 or $1,600 per se, those are all against homes. In fact, it was pretty well for homes on everything that I could find, and not just any homes. I mean, this one has a value of 309,000. Is what they're estimating it at there. This is only a $1,600 lien, and so we're talking about that being, I mean, not even 1%. It's like a 0.5% of the property's value. A very low percentage of value, really. And that's an amazingly low amount considering the fact that that lien has the potential to foreclosure rights if after 3 years it's not paid off. That's what's kind of impressive about it, is just the liens represent very small percentages here. Um, and so we can also see more information. Let's see what the property is. A couple things we can do. We can pull up the property itself in the map and see an overhead image here of it first.
Yeah.
So looking at this one here, we can see that it's a single family home, but there's also an additional lot kind of right there in the back where it looks like they
I
got
almost
some
wonder,
stuff parked.
yeah, I almost wonder if it almost looks a little bit commercial. I mean, it's not in a commercial area, but the way they've got all those cars parked out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's R2, but I wonder if they're operating some kind of business or something out of it. But we can go and take a look at that property if we want here. Um, in any case, for only a $1,600 lien, it's a very small lien amount for a property that has pretty we know at least $300,000 in value.
Well, and that's the reason why 95% of tax liens will go ahead and pay off before ever, going to the foreclosure process. Is that, this family or these owners aren't going to lose their home for $1,000 or $1,600, but it does give them the ability to not have any action taken on their house. And gives them, at least 3 years to be able to come up with the funds to pay that off, and that also doesn't include. Oh, I wonder if they changed it a little bit. I don't see any of the
Well,
cars now.
I think the cars are just gone. I think that's the lot, though. You can kind of see the weird curvature that it had there, and see that people drove in and out. Uh, maybe at the time, or maybe it was last owner, is what we're seeing there, images from a previous owner, because they have moved it. But yeah, I think it actually includes this lot, and then the house all the way over. But why don't we take a look at some other details here on it? Well, let's look at the tax bill, because roll up, there we go. That's one of the things that we are always going to be looking at or thinking about, because if you do get the chance to foreclose, let's say in 3 years, one of the requirements that the county is going to have is that you bring the taxes current, and that's going to include paying off, the delinquent tax bill. And so let's do view additional years here. And so here we can see that they paid for 2021, but they've been unpaid for 2022 and 2023. So that means that there was a lien issued last year, I think, right?
Oh, it was lien 2 years ago, which means that the lien that'll be sold in 2024, essentially will be the third tax lien on the property, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
So
that could be paid from 123, but I know that it has to take 2 years before they even issue a lien, on the property. At least that's what the state law says. So, with this, there's at least two certificates, if not three certificates, that are been issued against the property, that have been unpaid.
yeah, in fact, yeah, we can see the total bill right there. The amount is $2,800. That would be considered, the total amount right now of the lien and roll up. Um, but yeah, I think that is right there. There are other liens that have been issued, against this property. And what that probably means is that this property has an even higher chance of resulting in redemption for the investor. And that's because you already have another lien holder that's ahead of you that has the chance to foreclose on the property if they're, which they bought their lien at last year's sale. And so if that's the case, they're going to have that first year, they're going to have a year head start to foreclose on it. And if they do, what you'll experience is just a redemption. The property will redeem because you'll suddenly get a check, and plus the interest that you earned, but probably a lower chance though of it resulting in a foreclosure or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There's 2 years, so this is a second year lien, not a third year lien. So there's, the lien that was issued last year that was from the 2022 property taxes, and this year. And like Shade said, the chances are, if it does go to foreclosure, that first lien holder would go ahead and pay it off first. If they didn't, then you would have the opportunity to foreclose. But usually, if the lien holder, is savvy, and most people that are buying liens are going to know about when the redemption period and start at that point, so that they could either get their money back or acquire the property.
Here's something that blows me away, um, and that is the percentages on these liens are crazy. I mean, in terms of like being able to buy liens at such a low percentage of value. I mean, I couldn't find cheap enough. I mean, I guess I could look at $47 liens. I was looking at all the liens under $1,000. The one we just clicked on there is $461. So not a big lien. But as we look at the property that it's placed against, it's a single family home, that they value at $263,000. We've got the address on it right here.
One thing about that is it may be a partial lien. That's where we could look in the tax information to be sure. But they may have had a $1,200 bill, and maybe they pay it in the fall and the spring or something like that, and they paid one of those bills but didn't pay both of those bills. So sometimes when we see a really nice property that only has a small lien on it, it's usually because they paid part of the property taxes, just not all of the property taxes. So if there's even $10 remaining, then they'll put a $10 lien against that property. Even if they, if they have a $1,000 bill and they pay 990, they'll still create a $10, a lien on that $10 remaining debt.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. They will treat that just the same. And we can see overhead image. It's obviously it's a single family home, and very easy to tell that yeah, it probably is worth easily a couple 100,000 or 300,000 potentially. Um, what we might be able to do, and also we can take a look here and see what the billing tells us here on the property. So kind of a similar situation here on this one where there's a couple of years that are unpaid here, 2022 and 2023.
Yeah, so another second year lien. One thing we'll look at as well as we're looking at property is see if the address is an owner occupied property or is it a business, or some other second type property. We can look and see where the owner's located. Are they local to the area?
They're out of state. This is a Salt Lake City address.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought. It looked like an investment property to me.
Yeah, it probably is. And let me grab the address and let's take a look at it. Yeah, that does look like an ideal investment property.
In fact, Phoenix has finally started to cool down. It was the real estate market was going so crazy there that really it was an area that we had to quit investing in or even looking at just because of the 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 increase in value. But now they're starting to come down, and you're going to be able to start getting better deals in that area again.
Yeah, yeah. Again, this one's an incredibly nice property. And what's amazing about this is that with the low amount, that they're asking me, the lien it probably represents, like 1% of less than 1% of the property's value. Which is crazy for liens. Liens that represent a couple percent of the property's value are still good liens to buy. When they're this small of a percentage of value, it's just a drop in the bucket compared to the value.
What's interesting about this property too is we see that it's for sale. We can see information down there below about, grant programs. And so what these owners are probably doing is they're waiting until this property sells to pay off the property taxes. So when the property sells, then they'll go ahead and pay off those 2 years worth of tax lien. So, from their standpoint, they don't mind paying the interest and just waiting until the property sells to eventually pay the property taxes because they know they're not at any risk of losing their property. They still have at least a year redemption on that, or 2 year redemption on that lien from last year before they can start the foreclosure process. So from their standpoint, or at least similar type standpoints, somebody may go ahead and choose to decide to wait to pay those property taxes. In this case, waiting until the property sells, and then once it sells, essentially the sale will go ahead and pay off the liens.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, yeah, and one thing that is nice about the records that we're looking at here is that we can learn quite a bit about, about each one of the properties. You can learn what the exact history is here with the taxes and know exactly how much is owed. And all this stuff you can find pretty fast too. You know, um, Also, if you wanted to drop larger sums, there are lots of, any of the larger liens on here, like a $5,000 lien. I was looking at that, and the $5,000 liens are against like commercial properties and more valuable stuff. In fact, let's look at a few of these that are.
In addition to the more expensive liens, I was looking at some of the cheaper liens earlier today. Ones between $200 to $500, and there was lots of liens in that smaller price range that were we're secured against good, valuable property. That's what makes tax lien, investing exciting, is that we can find liens against, we could go look at the most expensive tax lien available and look at some of the cheaper liens. Now, in those cheaper liens are also going to be the junk, so we're going to need to evaluate the property and make sure it's usable and has value. But there is that ability to purchase liens in multiple different price points depending on what your capital is.
Yeah. Now, let's see here. Can they sell a property that has a lien? No, you shouldn't. I mean, that lien is going to prevent the ownership transfer. So, they could go through the process and start trying to sell it, and maybe they could take the proceeds and get it paid off so that they're able to do the transfer. If they do something like that, then in the process of trying to sell the property, then maybe they could make it happen.
Yeah, they won't be able to complete the transaction, but the escrow company, as they're doing that sale, like in the example that we were looking at with that rental property or the commercial, the home that they were selling, you know, they as they go ahead and do and sell the property, then as they're doing the escrow, it'll go ahead and pay off the lien so that they can actually transfer the deed into the new buyer's name. And so it'll all kind of happen, within the same time or shortly before. The escrow company will pay off the liens and then split the check, and it'll all be worked out that way. But Shay's exactly right. They wouldn't be able to sell the property unless those liens were taken off. But that's part of what the escrow company will do in the closing of the transaction is pay off any of those debts with the proceeds that come in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the other comment is you rely on the website that those are all the liens. Yeah. I mean, this is uh, the the basically the tax history here on the county website. Reporting. I mean, this is where they report essentially. Where other liens, or at least what what the tax are. That's what we're looking at really is the past due taxes and that amount.
What's interesting is almost every one of these properties that we've looked at, except for maybe that first one, is an out-of-state owner or a business. Like if you look at the owner up there above, the current mailing address is Angel Heart Behavioral Holdings, and you can see that the property address is different.
Yeah. Yeah. This one's another one that is probably an investment property, and a nice one at that. This one's a nice home. It probably has pretty good value there to it. And I think it was only what was it, like a $3,500 lien, $3,600 lien. Not that big of a lien, really. And yeah, there you've got a property. I mean, that's basically like the lien is less than 1% of the property's value. So yeah, it's hard to find the numbers that good. All right, let's take a look here. Yeah, even like with cheap lien, the inexpensive liens. Here's one for $153. Let's look at this one. And let's see. Even this one is going to end up being a home again. Look at that. It's like a $400,000 house.
Yeah, and this is most likely one of those partial liens that we talked about.
Let's see if we can figure out. Oh, no, now there's a partial lien right there. You see that? That is the $131 is what was left unpaid from the 2022, which is definitely a partial amount there. And then you've got 1 year of unpaid, beyond that. But yeah, that is a partial.
If you look underneath the pending payments up there above, there's an e-check of 131 that came in January 24th, so today.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this one is going to redeem.
Because it has 1,700 due, and we just saw that lien was 131 or something, wasn't it? Or 160?
Yeah, it was $145. What was it? Is it 153 we clicked on?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very small lien. At least for for a house like that. But it's about to redeem. It is a partial though. It's interesting how we can see that it was just kind of the leftovers there from from one of them. But that's what was interesting about this is, is it was hard to find, junky liens. Eventually, I was able to find one that was against a strip, but I had to look for a while.
Yeah, they're going to be on there probably more likely in the 500 to $10 price point. Will most of the junk land will be
Oh,
located.
here it is. That's the strip I found earlier. So this one was, if I finally found one of them here that was inexpensive, $148 here. This one is against, a piece of junk land, which if we go like that, we can see.
Yeah, nothing you can do with that property.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's interesting. Yeah, there's the one junk property there that I found so far, but other than that, I mean, we could probably find it too with some of the really inexpensive ones. But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these really inexpensive ones are also partials. Some of them might just be against junk property, though.
Yeah, there's still always going to be a number of junk property in any
Th-
county.
This one's a partial, so this $30 one is against a $350,000 house. If we look at here, let's pull up the tax bill again and see. It'll probably show us. Oh yeah, there you can see. There's so that's the full amount. What that is it's a half payment. That's what they didn't make was a half payment. Yeah,
Even at that, it seems like a small property tax on it.
yeah. Well, and it is. I think this one's just a piece of land.
Oh,
Oh no, no, actually no, no, no. This one is the house. Hold on, let's pull it up. It does seem like a very small property tax amount, and it is a house. That's a tiny property tax amount for the house. Here, yeah, boy, it'd be nice to be them. They only pay like $106 a year.
yeah, I don't know if nonprofit. I don't know what's going on with that. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But unless it's a partial payment and they're just showing what they have left. But interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think somehow they get way lower taxes than anybody else.
But hopefully that gives you guys kind of an idea of how to go through and review taxing certificates, look at some of the upcoming auctions. There really is a lot of opportunity. We were looking at Maricopa County. That'll probably have the most competition. There's a number of other counties, both using real auction, using I believe Grant Street, and then using Zeus Auction, where they'll be auctioning off these taxing certificates. And in some of those other counties, there'll even be less competition. And one thing we didn't, look at a whole lot in Phoenix, there's a lot more homes in that area, is that, as we're looking at taxing certificates, chances are you're just going to make back your interest. You're not going to acquire the property. And so if we're looking at two tax liens and one's on a $200,000 house, and one's on a $200,000 plot of land, chances are that home is going to be more aggressive in the bidding, which maybe we're only going to be able to get 6% interest rate on the home, where we could get 13 or 14% on the land. And so as you're looking at your taxing certificates or reviewing or registering, keep that in mind that some of those tax liens that maybe aren't quite as sexy can sometimes be just as good, because chances are we're just going to be getting the interest rate either way.
Oh, now which websites here? Is it the websites that we're showing? We just got a question there. If somebody wants us to show that, or say those three websites slowly. I'm trying to figure out which three it is that we're talking about here. Oh,
Most of
real.
them are going to be through a real auction, being the provider, or Zeus auction.
Oh yeah, Zeus auctions and the ZEUS I don't know if it's .com. Yeah, but Zeus auctions, real auction, and I don't know.
Grant Street Group had one last year. I'm not sure if they have one this year. I can't remember. I have to look that up. But those are the three companies that usually handle them.
All right, now let's review a few different deals of the week, some online deals.
Yeah, first what we're going to do is review a bad deal. We like reviewing good deals, but it's also interesting to go through and look at deals that are essentially bad. Kind of what were they thinking? This is one of those type of properties. We can see the lot located there to the right-hand side. We can see it's not really that big, and it's kind of got a weird shape to begin with to only be 1/14 of an acre. We can also see the land value there, it being pretty low and it bidding quite a bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, it already kind of had a higher minimum bid of $5,000 compared to its value, meaning that it was already underwater. It was kind of upside down. And then some bidders, got competitive about it and bid it up to 27,000 beyond that. That's all just totally wasted money because if you go and look at this property, in fact, which we did. One of the things you would find is that it, if you were to look at even a topographic map, it would show you that there is a huge elevation, drop right from the point where our property starts and to the end. It's basically our whole property's on a hill.
Yeah, in fact, if we look at the overhead map, we actually included, you can see kind of the brown lines that are going through. You can see it kind of closer onto the road, but these actually have the elevation lines into it. And I think that it dropped, like about 40 or 50 feet over that entire period, and that's a very tiny lot. So first of all, we don't even have legal access to the property because we can see it's quite a ways further away from the road, and there's a number of different properties that are between us and the road. Second, it's not legal to build, not only because of the size being small, but also the shape. That only being 6,000 square feet, we can see that it's maybe 20 feet wide, and then it kind of goes out to a little bit thicker. Also, the topographical issues that Shay talked about. This is going to be located on a hill. So this was sold at the Los Angeles sale this last year in December, and this essentially was a property where whoever spent that $27,000 lost their money. And we can see that there was 82 bids on this property. And so just doing some basic research, you would know that you'd want to avoid this property. Why they bought the property, we really don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, other than maybe it looked like a decent piece of land from the overhead map. And people got into a bidding war. That's about the only thing I can think of, because anytime you bid up, I mean, the minimum bid up, 5 times over, up to 27,000, starting off at five. You're probably bidding up the property beyond where you should be.
Well, I mean, even the value of it, they have land that's junk property that's higher value. The value of it at $3,000 through the county assessed shows that it's a risky property. This is another property that was offered, and this one, it's possible that it could have been usable. This one, when we wanted to show it kind of use as an example of one that could be usable, but got bid up to an incredibly high rate. We can see that the property is actually a vacant land, and if we look here at this lot, it's actually, you can see the vacant lot. I think it's the third one, or kind of right there in the middle. You can kind of see it between two of the homes there.
Oh yeah, I can see it there. It is kind of like right in the middle. You can see, they've got homes there nearly touching, and then there's a vacant lot right there, right in the middle.
Yeah, and there's a couple cars parked right there in front of it. They ended up starting out at 21,000. It's only 48 by 90 feet. They do have an assessed value of 92,000. So it makes a little bit more sense why somebody might pay up for this property, because they see that land value. Well, the county thinks it's worth 92 grand. That last property, the county said it was only worth 3 grand. So the fact that this one has some type of value to it, it may or may not be buildable, but that's where we've got to check the zoning that we talked a little bit about earlier before buying this property, because it's a 50-50 shot that this is even usable. So they may have spent 136,000 to allow a couple of people to park on their vacant lot. They can't do anything with it. That's where the research becomes so important.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty challenging to resell it, when you paid that kind of a price for it. Plus you're going to need to get title cleared because, it still has all the title issues. It still has a clouded title. And so, yeah, it just puts you in kind of a difficult situation with these. I mean, that's not necessarily a useless lot. It very well could be buildable, but even if it is buildable, I don't know that, it's a situation I would recommend to any student to do. Because you've essentially paid market, for a piece of land, and it still has all of these issues. I think the idea, you see that $21,000 opening bid, I mean, once you've bid that up to even 50,000 and above, you're starting to get into territory where you're overpaying for a tax sale probably, and they definitely overpaid here. Going way over, even the assessed value, and they went 30% above the assessed.
Well, and one thing that's interesting about this property as well is this isn't just your normal neighborhood building lot. We can see underneath the legal description over on the left-hand side in the middle that it says TR 335 Lot 1 Condo Unit 118 airspace and then 131st interest in common area, which means that this is a condo, essentially a condominium type home. So they're single family homes, but they're set up in an association. And so, this is one where we'd call and talk to the association. They could probably give us an idea if it's buildable. But the question I have when I see something like this is why hasn't anyone built on that property, or why wasn't it originally built when this development was first created? So, if this development looks like it's got to be at least 20 years old, I would assume, I guess we could look at the years built, but let's say it's 20 years at least, why hasn't anyone built that lot there where you can see that the homes there are premium, everything but that lot has been filled in?
Yeah, I mean, it is only 4,320 square feet. It is tiny. Really, it is not very much. So, yeah, lots of questions on that one. But they're not all bad. We have good deals here too. In fact, I think Carl was on the phone earlier. I think this is Carl's property. One of the properties that he bought anyway. We were looking at some of the properties that Carl picked up several homes this last summer. In fact, he just told us yesterday, I think, that he just wrapped up and finished his first fix and flip, which is awesome, really awesome to hear. He was targeting several different homes, and this was just one of the properties, that we looked at that he picked up at the auction here this last summer, where he paid, 20,000 for it. This is a property that that is valued around 100,000. It's a great rental property, in that it's a 3 bedroom, 1 bath. It's got good rent potential there for it. And as did a lot of the properties there that he was going after. But this one also had interior images, which was nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is where you can pick buy structures, and there's still going to be plenty of profit margin in there to do repairs. In fact, with this particular auction, it was one of the areas where they had some interior photos. They also allow walkthroughs in New York, Michigan. They have a little bit different laws that'll allow photos to be taken of properties that are not occupied, or had a walkthrough. And so you can get a better idea of what those interior conditions are and make your determination. But this would be an example of the single family home that you're picking it up at the right price, and it's got enough potential profit where it's worth over 100 grand, where you've got $80,000 of equity within that property. So maybe you put in $10,000 to rehab it. You're still buying the property. Even if you were to put in $30,000 to rehab it, you're still buying the property. At that point, you've got a completely rehab property that you picked up for 50 cents on the dollar. And so, there is good tax deed homes that can be purchased out there. It's just making sure that we check that condition. We do the drive-by research, the drive-by on-site evaluation like we talked about earlier, and make sure that we set our bid price and stick to it.
Yeah, yeah, but properties like this, I mean, in terms of rental income, this has a lot of power. The ability to bring in, good income every single month, and especially considering what he paid, that's a property that could pay for itself within a few years. So, yeah, excellent deal. That we'd love to see there, and certainly congratulate Carl on that. But I think everybody here may be a member, but if you are not a member yet, we'd love to have you become a member.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Membership, most of you guys here on the call, everyone on the call is part of the membership program, but for anyone that will release segments of this out on YouTube, if you're interested, definitely let us know. Before we finish it up, we'll answer a few questions. I think we answered at least some of the questions that we got from you guys during the call. One is, hi, I'm currently have a tax lien certificate and to go to need the next steps of foreclosure on a judicial level. Can I get some advice on how that is in Arizona?
That is a good question here. And if you have also, so if everybody doesn't know, with tax lien states, when the redemption period comes to an end, what happens from that point forward depends a little bit, it depends on the state that you're in. Um, there are what we call states that have a self-executing foreclosure, which are states kind of like Florida, where you just notify the county and the county kind of handles the foreclosure for you. And then there are other states that have a non-self-executing foreclosure, which is where it's up to the lien holder to execute the foreclosure. And Arizona is one of those states that have a non-self-executing foreclosure. And so you need to hire an attorney to help you execute a foreclosure on the property. And so basically what that entails is the attorney just writing up the foreclosure notices and then sending out those notices by way of certified mail. And so at that point, then, the I mean, the property owners are either going to pay it off, by the foreclosure date, or they'll lose the property. If they do pay it off, then it'll redeem just like it would if it redeemed normally. But if they don't, then it's like hitting a home run because, you'll be able to foreclose on the property, but you may need to be prepared to pay off any other taxes that are owed in order to foreclose.
Yeah, well, and like we've said, the state can make a big difference on how that judicial foreclosure works. In Arizona, you're going to need to be contacting an attorney. The attorney is going to go through the quiet title process and essentially foreclose on the property. Where maybe a state like Florida, you have to fill out what's called a deed application, and then the county actually forecloses on that property, puts it up at a deed sale, and whoever buys it at the deed sale pays off the lien holders. Or a state like South Carolina, where after the year period is over, the year redemption period, most of the counties will just go ahead and issue a deed. So that's kind of the difference between a self-executing state and a non-self-executing state, is who's going to handle the foreclosure. Is it going to be done on the county level, or is it going to be done on by ourselves using an attorney? And so in the case of Arizona, that would definitely be with an attorney.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think Carl had a good comment there too, in that in some states there's a statutory time frame to start the foreclosure. So in some states, not only are there limitations on how long it'll last, but you have to start foreclosure within a set time period. Otherwise, you risk losing the lien.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And let's see here. Okay, another question here is, how long does it take to sell? How long does it take a small town property to sell? 1 to 2 months? Um, Really, with a question like this, the biggest factor with selling, I think, is price. I mean, and what it is you're selling, if it's usable. But I mean, at the right price, it doesn't have to take very long at all. I think where people, have problems selling stuff is when they're trying to get full market value. They're just tossing their property out in the open market and hoping for the best. It can probably take a while, but that's if you're waiting for the sellers, to come to you. You can drive sellers to you by offering, by having lower prices, or by being able to offer something that other sellers are not able to offer.
Yeah, one thing to think about as well, if we're buying tax deed properties, this is a not a quick process. even just in going through the county, sometimes we can get a deed within a couple of weeks. Sometimes it can take a couple of months. In fact, I think we just we attended a an auction in November, maybe no end of November, and we just barely got the deeds this week. And so, there's going to be a time frame. So whenever we're buying tax deed property, we give ourselves a year to be able to essentially sell the property. We account for a year's worth of holding cost, whether that be, the other taxes or the current taxes that may be due that year. If there's any HOA fees or anything like that, we're going to take that into account. We may be able to sell the property in 30 days. It may take 3 months, it may take 6 months, it may take a year. Part of that is also going to have a lot of factors in there, even if we're talking about a small town or a large town. Obviously, like Shade said, the more that we're able to discount the property or sell it for cheaper, the quicker it's going to be able to be sold. So really, to us, it's kind of an art of trying to get the most out of the property we can, but also selling it in a quickly, timely manner. So if we could sell it, and I guess that's kind of the end.
That's got the answer there. We've got one more here, which is when a tax lien purchase pays a premium for the certificate and the property owner decides to pay the outstanding taxes, they also have to pay the premium. And how does that work? And by the way, if some of you don't know, there are different ways that tax liens are sold. In some places, they'll set the maximum interest rate return as kind of the starting bid, and then the interest rate will bid down, and the bidder willing to go lowest is one that's going to win. But in other cases, what they may do is they have the starting amount of the lien, and they may increase the price of the lien, in what's called a premium, that somebody might pay, an amount over the lien. However, one of the things that's challenging about that is that um, how exactly that premium works, and whether you get paid interest on it, and many other things all come down to state law. And so it's not the same from state to state. It's an answer that varies between different states. In some cases, premiums are paid back, and in other cases premiums are not paid back, and so they have to be uh, you know accounted for in the amount of lien. And so yeah, actually it can go both ways on that. I don't know if you've got something to add there to that, Steve.
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. It's really going to be state dependent. An area like Colorado may not pay back the premium, where another state, New Jersey, is going to essentially pay back the premium, and then you can get a penalty off that premium. So when we're talking about a tax lien certificates, it's so important that we look into the state laws. That's part of the reason we kind of went over, as we were talking about Arizona today, and looked at a little bit more of the state laws. In fact, if we were, bidding in there, we'd go through the bidding rules as well, and make sure that we understand exactly how it works. Some states are going to be a little bit more simple, and some states are going to be more complicated, especially as we're getting into the premium. When you're bidding down the interest rate, that's a little bit easier for you to know. Okay, well, it starts at 18%. How low am I willing to go on this certificate? When you're doing something like a premium bid, let's say it's $1,000 certificate, it's who's willing to pay the most over the $1,000. So maybe Shade does 1,001, and I do 1,002, and Shade does 1,003, and we end up bidding up to where 1,010 or $1,015. Whether that premium, makes interest, or whether we get that premium back, will be completely dependent on those individual state laws.
Yeah, in fact, there are some areas where you don't even have to pay the premium unless you go to foreclose on the property, I think. you know um,
Yep,
it,
exactly.
and so it really does vary so much, to kind of depending on where exactly it is that you're looking. And that is one of the things that probably one of the most important things to understand is exactly what happens with the premium, and whether it gets paid back or not, and how that works, because that's going to affect it's going to have the biggest effect on the interest rate returns. Because essentially the benefit of those areas is you can automatically earn the maximum return that the state pays out. But you have to be able to account for how much, it costs you to buy the lien, basically, or to get the lien, because that's going to be coming out of, your earnings from that. And so it has to balance out.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's see here. I think it's pretty much, there was one other question that we had from Francisco that was about, uh, would you recommend working with wholesale land buyers before buying the deed? Seeing a $250,000 lot that owes 60,000 in taxes, I could see, uh, I see it would be a deal. If I buy it completely for 100,000, it's struck off to a school district, and selling it between 150,000 to 200,000. But would the wholesale land buyer go directly and buy it from the school district once they find out that I haven't closed on the deal yet? In terms of working with other wholesale land buyers, I think that could be beneficial. In that you might find somebody else you could sell properties to. Um, in terms of them going around you, I don't know that I would try to sell them or work out a deal ahead of time, before you've been able to acquire it. But if you do, yeah, I guess that's one of the risks that you run, is somebody trying to go around you. Although they would need to understand tax sales, or at least be able to find the property, or maybe it is land bank owned, in which they could. I suppose it's a risk that you run whenever you're dealing with other investors.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Exposing where you're picking up the deal, and if they are interested, they could easily go around you and be able to buy it. If you are buying a property that's more valuable like that, whoever's the wholesale land investor is usually trying to get it for as cheap as they can. Just like any investor, they want to be able to get the best price for it. And so you 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 may be an easy way to be able to flip a property, but if a property is that desirable and has enough value, it could be better to sell the property on your own, or go through quiet title, or offer something like tax title services, or even list it with an agent. They may be able to give you more overall profit on that deal than just by doing a quick sell. So there's advantages. I don't think it hurts at all to reach out to them. You can kind of give them the parameters of what the property is and see if they have an interest. But I think that there is that risk of them going and essentially buying the deal if it's something that they're actually interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we hope you enjoyed what we covered here tonight. If there are more questions, you're welcome to email those in, or you can save them here for next week. We would love to get those questions then as well. So, thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
Yep. Thanks again.